Good morning. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 26, verses 6 through 35. And I encourage you to read this passage personally because it teaches us about fear, God's faithfulness, patience, and the peace that comes from trusting Him. In verses 6 through 11, Isaac repeats a failure similar to Abraham's earlier mistake. Out of fear, he says Rebekah is his sister. Fear again leads to poor judgment, yet God protects Rebekah and preserves the covenant. When Abimelech discovers the truth, he rebukes Isaac, but also protects them. This reminds us that even when believers act in weakness, God remains faithful to his promise. In verses 12 through 14, Isaac sows in the land during a famine and receives 100-fold return. The Lord blesses him, and he becomes very prosperous. This prosperity, however, creates envy among the Philistines. God's blessing does not always remove conflict. Sometimes it reveals the heart of others. In verses 15 through 22, the Philistines stop up the wells Abraham had dug, and Isaac's servants repeatedly dig new wells, only to face dispute again and again. Instead of fighting, Isaac moves forward peacefully. Finally, in verse 22, he names a well Rehoboth, meaning room, saying, "Now the Lord hath made room for us." Isaac shows patience, trusting that God will provide space and peace without striving or conflict. In verse 23 through 25, Isaac goes to Beersheba, and the Lord appears to him, reaffirming the covenant. "Fear not, for I am with thee." Isaac responds by building an altar and calling upon the Lord. This shows the proper response to God's reassurance, worship, and dependence. In verses 26 through 31, Abimelech comes to Isaac seeking peace, recognizing that the Lord is with him. What began in conflict ends in covenant. Isaac makes a feast, and they swear peace together. A life shaped by trust in God often produces peace with others. In verses 32 and 33, Isaac's servants find water again, confirming God's continued provision. God's faithfulness is steady even through repeated challenges. Finally, in verse 34 and 35, we see Esau marrying a Hittite woman, which brings grief to Isaac and Rebekah. This closing note reminds us that choices matter. While God's covenant continues, human decisions still bring real consequences within families and relationships. And once again, we can see how this passage points us to Christ. Just as Isaac experienced God's faithfulness despite weakness, believers experience grace through Jesus Christ, who perfectly trusted the Father where we often fail. Through him, we learn patience, peace, and a reliance on God's provision. Today, when faced with conflict, fear, or pressure, choose patience and trust rather than striving, continually walking faithfully, knowing that God will make room for you in his time and provide what you need as you remain dependent on him. God bless.